The FDA just released new recommendations about how much salt we're consuming. They say we are all consuming way too much salt, and they're recommending a big decrease in our daily salt intake in the hopes of cutting rates of heart disease, which is still the #1 killer in this country.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of heart health, there's also some important new guidance about taking a daily dose of aspirin. It's something a lot of folks have been doing for years. So we want to bring in an expert to break it all down for us for what we need to know. Dr. Jennifer Haythe is a cardiologist from Columbia University, Irving Medical Center. Dr. Haythe, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, this is one of the most significant changes we've seen, at least recommendations in nutrition policy. FDA want to reduce salt in food products by 12% in the next 2.5 years, like 163 food categories. So when we talk about salt, what are the negative impacts of consuming too much of it? And are we talking about like literally a salt shaker, or are we talking about added salt to foods?
So that's a great question. We're actually talking about both. So we're talking about how much total sodium you take in a day. And it doesn't all have to be sodium chloride. It can also be sodium found in other foods. And a lot of the salt we take in is already put into our food pre-prepared, which is what the FDA is sort of trying to target here, is how can we lower the salt that people are getting from foods that they buy already prepared, things that they're getting over the counter or in the supermarket. So in general, we want people to have less than 3 grams or 3,000 milligrams of sodium a day. Now, most people in this country are eating somewhere between, 3 to 4 to 5 grams of salt or sodium a day, which is a lot. And, we know that from many studies that high salt leads to high blood pressure. It, increases your risk of high blood pressure. And in patients who have heart failure, really causes worsening of their heart failure symptoms by causing fluid retention. There's a number of studies. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, there's a number of studies that we know that show that people who have less salt in their diet actually have less cardiovascular disease over time.
I was trying to think of something practical because I think we know the milligram amount, but you forget it. Let's say you're at the grocery store, you're picking up a bag of chips. Is there a number that we should look for? So, for example, I remember somebody telling me a while ago, when you see the percentages, if the sodium is under 20%, that's okay. Is there any rule of thumb, or do you agree with that, so that we know if we pick up a bag of chips, or let's say we pick up a boxed meal, is there something where we flip over on the back that we can say, you know what, that's too much for this one thing?
Right. Well, I think that is a great question. You have to think about how much you're eating throughout the day and also what you're adding. I tell my patients, you think of those salt packets you get at the store, the deli. You really shouldn't be having more than 2 of those your whole day in all the food you eat. Wow. So if you think about that, that's not a lot of salt.
Yeah.
So when you buy things over the counter, you really have to look carefully, make sure that it's very low salt containing. And also we know that this is actually something that the food industry has been doing somewhat over time, is reducing the amount of salt. And they've seen that people don't seem to notice when they reduce the amount of salt. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about this big news on aspirin as well. The U.S. Preventative Services Task Force released this draft recommendation yesterday. They say that most adults now shouldn't take a daily low dose of aspirin to prevent, first heart attacks or strokes. I feel like we've been hearing the opposite for quite some time. So what are the risks? Who should still be taking it today?
Yeah, so this is, controversial, and I think that people get confused when people change guidelines, and it's important to remember that we base our guidelines on data that comes in, and data is constant. It changes over time. So the new guidelines say that people who are over the age of 60, who don't have existing heart disease or are not on an aspirin a day because of prior heart attack or stent or stroke, that those people really should talk to their doctor and not just empirically take a baby aspirin a day, because the risk of bleeding, not just gastrointestinal bleeding or external bleeding, but also bleeding in their head, is quite high and not worth the risk compared to the benefit. Now, people 40 to 59, again, should not start taking an aspirin prophylactically until they speak to their doctor. And so what I've been telling my patients is, ask me or ask your doctor, ask whoever your cardiologist is or your primary care doctor, should I be on an aspirin? What are my risks? Am I someone who's at really high risk and should take an aspirin? Or am I someone who's going to, take an unnecessary chance being on a baby aspirin? The other thing that's important to remember is that we've really gotten better at treating so many, diseases of the heart. So with, better blood pressure control and better cholesterol control, the risk of heart disease goes down. And so the risk, the benefit of an aspirin is not necessarily as great as it used to be.
So Dr. Haythe, what kind of things should people be watching out for when they're at high risk for heart disease?
So you should look to see, do you have a strong family history of a heart attack in a parent less than the age of 55, 60? Do you have a high blood pressure for many years? Do you have diabetes? Are you overweight? Do you have a sedentary lifestyle? If your overall risk of heart disease or a heart attack in the next 10 years is high or greater than 10%, your doctor may recommend you to take a baby aspirin, and that's okay, assuming you've never had any bleeding issues. However, if you have no risks and you're healthy and you exercise and you just think you should be taking a baby aspirin, that's the way you have to intervene and say, actually, you don't want to have a brain bleed or, have unnecessary GI bleeding.
All right. Well, Dr. Jennifer Haythe, a lot of great information.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Find your favorite recipes, celebrity interviews, uplifting stories, shop our favorite deals, and so much more with the Today app. Download it now.